Cheers, man.
Cheers.
Today, we're going to be talking about something I do every day.
You read books every day?
I do read books every day
Wow.
on my Kindle. I need to read books. So I need to read books to shift my mind into sleep mode.
I'm going to do something, or I'm going to say something very controversial in the book reading community.
Okay.
I have completely shifted to audiobooks.
Okay. You shifted to audiobooks.
Yeah.
The thing is with audiobooks, I don't remember what's being said.
Oh, see, I can retain probably about as good as I can read.
Yeah. I need to read it.
But for me, I love storytelling.
Yeah.
And so audiobooks feel like someone's well, I mean, they are. They're reading a story to me.
Yeah.
So like I don't know, audiobooks just scratch that itch.
Yeah, if you read a novel, I think that works. But I normally read like nonfiction books and stuff where I have to remember stuff, and it's just.
Well, I mean, I've just replaced those with like crackpot YouTube videos.
Yeah, right.
Conspiracy theories.
Yeah. But yeah, so we're talking about reading books, but specifically, I think we're going to talk about reading books in the context of school.
Yeah, and for like I would say maybe not so much school, but for like academic purposes.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to learn either by because you need to read it for a class, or in the case of many of our listeners, they might be picking up a book to kind of understand like English culture more.
Right? I was really surprised when I think in English class people will read whole books, but in like Kokugo class, the Japanese language class, whatever that you have in school, that people, in a lot of schools, you don't read full books. You read like a piece of a book that's in a reader. So it's like the Shonen Jump things where you have like a little bit of multiple books. And that really struck me as so weird because in the States, we don't do that.
Yeah, it's like as soon as a kid learns to read, I would say like the
elementary school,
the way kids read or the way kids learn in the US, it's like you have them learn their ABCs when they're a toddler and like 4 or 5. I would say by like year 2 or 3, a kid should know their ABCs. And they should be able to understand what letters they're looking at.
Yeah, right.
And then when they hit elementary school, when they hit kindergarten, they should be able to read words.
Yeah.
And like kind of in kindergarten and progressing into first grade, they should start being able to read sentences.
Yeah, right.
And once you can read sentences, you can read a book.
Yeah, right.
Right. And that's when it starts. So you usually have book reports starting in like 2nd or 3rd grade. And the idea is like you'll have a time period, like the teacher will assign a time period, usually like a week or a month or depending on the size of the book. The child will read the book and make a book report.
Yeah.
And that can be in like a presentation or it can be like a writing thing. But the idea is you're getting the kid to read a book and then they have to say what the book was about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and you also do that for summer vacation. You have your summer reading list. You can pick X number of books on the list. Yeah.
Oh, it was super, especially high school.
Yeah.
Like, it's good that you mentioned X because once you hit high school, it's not one book. There'll be like 2 or 3 books. It'll be like, this is summer vacation homework. Read these books, write a report on them. And book reports go all the way into college. Like, you'll be doing book reports even in college.
Yeah.
Especially like if you're a liberal arts major like me, and I got an English degree. Yeah, and that's like most of my degree was doing book reports.
Yeah, right.
So, but it's so integral because I think, and I don't think Japanese culture is different, but in English culture, our culture is really, really established from our authors.
Yeah, right.
Right. And you look at people like Shakespeare. Shakespeare's a really good example. Shakespeare is like the founding like cornerstone of storytelling in English culture.
Yeah.
Like you look at it's actually crazy how many stories are just actually variants of Shakespeare.
And also how many words and phrases he developed.
Yeah. It's insane. It's insane. So it's like everything is like established from this guy, and it wasn't just Shakespeare. There's plenty of there's countless other writers, both American and British, and from other English speaking countries. But all of these establish what culture is today, and I'm sure Japan is the same, but I feel like there's so much more of an emphasis on like novels and reading books.
Well, yeah, because I mean, I think when you're younger and you take like your English classes, kind of like the Japanese kokugo classes here, you do learn vocabulary words. Yeah. Maybe you learn about grammar and stuff like that, or writing. But when you get older, it's just reading. You just read books most of the time, and you like learn how to process your thinking through reading books. Like I remember one of the books that really started that for me was in high school when I was a freshman. We read The Great Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye. And you've read those books too, right? Yeah.
Oh, dude, I've read everything on the list.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I'm an English teacher.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. And so it's like, because it's not just, you read it and say, okay, what happened in the book? But you have to say, why did this happen? Why did the author choose to put this in? What's the meaning? What's the symbol behind it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, why is the prostitute's dress green? It's like, what?
Yeah.
But like having you think about that stuff, But do you have any, actually, so one thing I do want to check with you is, did you actually read all the books you were assigned in school?
Yes.
Good.
But if I had access to the tools that kids have today, there is no way I would have read a single book.
Right. Well, but even
we used to have Cliff Notes back in the day.
Yeah. So because I read all the books. The only book I did not read was Anne of Green Gables. I think that was it.
That book was boring.
It was so boring.
It's like this little girl growing up on a farm, and that's the story.
I know. And that was the only book where I got 3 chapters in, and I'm like, I cannot read this anymore.
Oh, this, I that just triggered a memory because like my students watched Anne of Green Gables.
It's
as
a big
the movie.
thing here. Yeah,
it's a huge thing. I don't know why. Yeah, I think it because it's like so like old American.
Yeah, but it's Canadian.
Oh, is it?
She's from Prince Edward Island.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
I thought she was American.
It's Newfoundland. It's almost America.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I always thought it was America.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's so boring.
Yeah.
Nothing happens in any of the books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing.
But what was funny is because like I remember because my friends, they would always get Cliff Notes. And so Cliff Notes, for you guys who don't know, they were these little sheets you could buy at the bookstore, which were summaries on what happens in the story, what are the themes in the story, what are the symbols in the story, like why did this person eat this food or whatever. And they were basically the stuff you'd see on the test. So when you didn't want to read a book, you would get the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
And then you could take the test.
Oh, so you can find out like the big cliffhanger of Anne of Green Gables when she falls in the pond and gets a fever.
Yeah,
and then recovers. Oh, man. And that's it. That's it. Nothing happens.
Yeah, it's a book about nothing.
Jesus, man.
Which in all fairness, in all fairness though, that's very Japanese, I feel, because like in Japan, you have all these movies and all these stories of like nothing really happens, but it's just like everyday life.
Oh my God, it's so funny that you mentioned that because I was just thinking that because I watch movies. My wife and I watch movies pretty frequently. We kind of go back and forth on watching Japanese and watching American ones. And one thing that I noticed about a lot of Japanese movies is nothing really happens.
Yeah,
and I don't want to mean that in an offensive way, but like I'm gonna give an example. Okay, I'm not even gonna name a movie, but you could apply this to a lot of movies here. Okay. There's a guy who moved out of his hometown, and now for whatever reason, the family business requires him to come back to his hometown. He doesn't remember people there, but then as he starts living in the town, he slowly starts remembering the people there. There's an older woman that usually works at a restaurant who's very friendly to them and knew him when he was a child. He had his comical brother and or best friend that still lives in the town. There is a platonic hot girl that lives and works with him during this time, and he runs the family business. Halfway through the story, there is a problem, and he can't do the business anymore. He solves the problem, and the end of the movie is he goes back to doing the business.
Yeah.
And that's the story.
You know, it's funny that you say that because, like, I remember, like, so with my dad, we watched Spirited Away.
Sure.
He loves that movie. It's great.
Yeah.
But then we watched My Neighbor Totoro, and he couldn't finish that. And what happens in My Neighbor Totoro? It's like they move to a new town.
Yep.
They get involved in the local community.
Yep.
They meet a special friend, Totoro, who does some fun things.
Yep.
Then May gets lost.
Yep.
And then they find her.
Yeah.
And then
like,
things are okay.
All right, cool. All right,
we're good.
Well, we're gonna go home now.
Yeah.
Grandma's waiting.
Yeah, exactly. Because in American stories, there's always like this like there's the story arc of this character growing.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And it's funny because in like My Neighbor Totoro, you have that climax-esque thing, which is you have the problem and she's found.
Yeah.
But it's not really tied to the growth of
Yeah.
Satsuki, you know? It's just kind of something that happens. Like, okay.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point where I think Japan tries to focus on like a slice of life and tries to focus on like capturing life. Whereas Western storytelling focuses on the hero's journey, right? The people in the story always end up better than they were when they started the story.
Yeah.
Right? That's always the case.
Yeah.
Or it should be, right?
Yeah.
But it's just like
so Anne of Green Gables is very much like that. But yeah, so Anne of Green Gables is the only book that I got the Cliff Notes for.
Man.
But for you when you were in school, because you know, by the time you graduate high school, you read tons of books, you know?
Yeah.
What was one of the most memorable books you've read?
1984.
1984, yes, that's a big one.
I love that book.
It's a good book.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Why?
Because I think, I mean, it's a very, obviously it's a very political book, but it's so relevant to real life.
Yeah.
That like, as soon as you read the book, and you don't even have to get far in the book before you stop and you're like, wait a second.
This is already happening.
These are the same things. This is all happening. Like, and it's so crazy. I loved reading that book, and I frequently go back to it. And I've taught classes around that book. It's so good. Another one is The Giver.
Giver was when did you read that?
I've read it like 5 or 6 times. The first time I read it was in junior high.
Yeah, I read it in middle school too. I think I was like 11 years old when I first read that.
I think The Giver is actually 1984 for kids.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's kind of how I would put it. Because you can have high school students read 1984 and they can get it, but they're not really going to get it until they're college age or adults. But if you try to give 1984 to like a junior high kid, they won't understand anything.
Yeah, because it's too symbolic.
There's just too it's too deep.
Yeah. The thing I really like about The Giver. So first, for people who don't know the book, there's also a movie if you want to watch it. But it's like this.
It's a pretty decent movie too.
It is a good movie.
Yeah.
Because
it's got Jeff.
Don't you love it? How
Jeff Bridges.
Yeah,
I love him.
He's such
a good actor.
I love how everything goes from black and white to color.
Yes.
Movie. Yeah.
So a big thing about The Giver, and like I said, I really like to compare it to 1984 because the stories are basically the same.
Yeah.
In many ways, if you really break down the story, it's about a guy who starts getting disillusioned with his life, and he starts seeing all the issues in society, and he, for lack of a better word, becomes woke. That's where the term comes from.
He wakes up. He wakes
right?
up.
And he sees reality for what it is. And in 1984, because Big Brother's always watching him, he has to do it in a lot of really subtle ways.
Yeah.
And you notice his character change throughout the book, and in very, very subtle little movements. Like, I can't write this in a journal because there's a camera watching me at all times. So I'm just going to write a word here and then put my book in a different spot.
Yeah, right.
Right. And that, like, if you're reading that, you're like, oh, okay, he's thinking things now. But in The Giver, it's a lot more emotional, which is great because what are 13-year-olds?
Emotional.
They're a giant ball of emotions and they don't understand things, what's going on, but they do understand feelings.
Yeah.
And so you have this kid who just turns out to be a preteen also, who's going through all these emotions. He's going through puberty, which is not supposed to happen in his society.
Yeah.
He's having sexual dreams about, like
this girl
he likes. He starts seeing color for the first time. And he has all this happening, and it's all of the story is framed in a way that a kid can understand.
Let's kind of I want to kind of give a synopsis of the book, or like the main theme.
Okay.
So basically, The Giver is placed in this future society where there is world peace. There's no war.
Yep.
Everyone has a role. There's zero unemployment, zero homelessness. Everyone seems to be happy. But what happens is when people become a certain age, the society gives them their job. Yeah. They're assigned a job. And there's this one guy, there's one boy, the main character, who is assigned the job as, I forget the name, like the Rememberer, or not the Giver, but basically...
It's a Remembrancer.
The Remembrancer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he doesn't really even know what that job is. He knows it's like there's some knowledge of society that he's supposed to get, but he goes to the Remembrancer's house, and he finds out what the job is that, this futuristic society has basically erased all of their history and have created a brand new society on a blank slate where there's no bad things. Everyone is peaceful. But the memories of the real past, of war, of emotion, of passion, are kept in this one guy and the Remembrancer. And it's the job of the Remembrancer to remember what life used to be like. And when he starts working with the Remembrancer and he gets those memories, his world was black and white. He starts to see things in color. He starts to wake up and have these emotions. And what he realizes is that, before you leave your house every day to go to your job, to go to your school, you're supposed to get your shot of vitamins at the door. Every house has a shot of vitamins. You put your wrist there and you get a little prick because it gives you your vitamins. But those are really
almost like these docile drugs.
Yeah, to make you more calm, to like reduce your emotions, to make you feel more
Ritalin,
plastic.
basically.
Ritalin, yeah, right. And so he stops taking those and he starts becoming human again.
Yeah.
And like he starts seeing how robotic his world is.
Yeah.
So it's a good book.
Yeah. It's very good.
It was one of the first books I read where that made me think and that I really liked it,
Yeah. So I mean there's so many like books that I read during that age, which I think are really like pivotal for understanding American culture, like Tom Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer, yeah.
Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
Those ones you kind of understand. That one has more of a historical context because you understand like slave culture in the American South.
Right.
And kind of like the relationship between black people and white people going on in like, the early 1800s.
I think was it Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer who finds like a slave boy and like goes up the river, not down the river.
Because if I remember, it's been a while since I read, but Huckleberry Finn is just Tom Sawyer's friend, right?
Yeah, I think they're friends.
I think it's friends, right?
They're both Mark Twain.
Yeah. So Tom Sawyer ends up finding this escaped slave.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like kind of like processing that. And it's like Tom Sawyer is a young white boy who comes from like an upper middle class family.
Yeah. There's a movie that's based loosely on that called The Peanut Butter Falcon. Have you seen that?
No.
It's crazy. It's Shia LaBeouf is the main character. And there's a boy with Down syndrome who wants to become a pro wrestler who escapes from his like housing facility. And they meet up and Shia LaBeouf is like, I'm going to help you be a pro wrestler, man. And he like takes him through.
That actually sounds like a fun story.
It's a fun story, man. Yeah. It's really fun.
Down syndrome people are so awesome, dude. I used to help out and coach Special Olympics when I was in high school. Yeah. And so we worked with a lot of kids who had, various issues, but we'd get Down syndrome kids. Dude, they're always so hilarious.
This kind of goes, I feel like this goes back into the parenting episode that we had before, but like, people think because someone has Down syndrome that they're just incapable and they have to be babied their whole life and like taken care of.
In some ways they do.
I mean, in some ways they do, but So one of my dad's friends, his son has Down syndrome, but he became a really good athlete. And like, he's living really well by himself.
I don't know what it is about Down syndrome, but I think there's like some kind of like hormonal imbalance that they just build up muscle.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I pretty much every Down syndrome person I've ever met is like insanely strong.
Yeah. And it's just like, but like, because a lot of times, you can kind of go two ways where it's like, oh, he's handicapped, I need to take care of him. Or, oh, he has a difficulty, I need to make him stronger, and like seeing those two things. But anyways, back to books. So we talked about good books, but what are some books other than Anne of Green Gables that you just hated that you wish you couldn't read again?
God, that book sucked. Scarlet Letter. Hey guys, if you've watched this far, you're going to love our Austin and Arthur friends.
In the Austin and Arthur friends, you're going to really improve your English listening. And I mean a lot.
Yeah. So for each episode, you'll get English and Japanese subtitles, so you can check your listening and comprehension.
You'll also get access to a members-only community where you can talk with us, the both of us. Mainly me, right?
No, definitely not. For more info, click on the link here, or in the description box of this video.
Thanks for being our friend. Woo! I have no friends. The Scarlet Letter.
I hated that book.
Can you just give a synopsis of what that's about?
So basically, I mean, I'm just gonna really simplify this. If I remember right, I think I'm remembering. This is about the girl being like labeled as a whore, right?
Yeah, because she had she got pregnant out of marriage.
Yeah. So basically, like, it's a story about, it's like Mean Girls, but maybe our audience isn't gonna understand that. But basically, there's this girl who, breaks the society's rule of like having married or sex out of wedlock, and she gets pregnant, and basically society. What's that?
She becomes a social outcast.
Yeah, she becomes an outcast, and she gets like marked in red.
Yeah, so she has a scarlet A on her. Yeah. And a scarlet is kurenai, right? It's a scarlet. It's a red letter A to mean adultery, means you had sex out of marriage.
Yeah, and it's like you're a whore, you're just disgusting, you're worthless, like you don't belong with us, like that kind of thing, right? And the story is about her embracing that and just being like, all right, cool, I'm gonna wear this. Screw you guys. Yeah. Right. And so it's a nice message, but it just didn't click with me.
I get that, but that book takes place in like the Salem Village, colony, which is where I'm from. Yeah. And there's actually a statue of Nathaniel Hawthorne, the guy who wrote the book, in Salem, and I go by it all the time when I'm driving by. So I like that book because I liked especially the second half of it, where when she gets older and the older generation that remembers her sin, they die off or they forget. And she ends up doing really nice things for the community. And actually that A symbol becomes a thing to remember her by. They don't remember what it's for, but they're like, oh, she's really good, And it turns out that it's the pastor of the community that knocked her up. Yeah. And he's the guy who like hid from it the whole time. He's the holy guy who's supposed to not break the rules, and he did it, Yeah. But one book though that I didn't like, I don't know if you've read this, because I read it in AP English, was Ethan Frome.
Okay, you're gonna have to tell me. I've never heard of that.
So Ethan Frome is a horrible book because it's a book about it's a book basically about how shitty the winter is in New England. Like that's what is where I'm from, because it's about these people who live in Massachusetts, and like the woman, this man Ethan Frome is married to this woman who's very sickly, and he has to take care of her, and she's kind of resentful that she's so weak and she has to be taken care of by her husband, and then her husband ends up developing feelings for this other lady, and before he like officially cheats on her, he and that lady that he likes, they're going sledding together, and they get into an accident. They become paralyzed, and they get carried back to the house. And then the sickly wife has to take care of both of them because they're like paralyzed. And she develops strength of character because now instead of being the dependent, she's now being depended on. So she develops her strength, but she's resentful because she has to take care of her husband and this girl that he liked for the rest of their lives until they die. Yeah. That's the book. And it's set in like the cold New England winter where everything is gray and cold and how life sucks.
Did you ever read the book Z for Zachariah?
No. What's that about?
So Z Z for Zachariah is a book about surviving nuclear war.
What? Okay.
Right. I really actually didn't like this book.
Okay.
But I didn't like it. Anyways, I'll go over the story.
Mm-hmm.
These are all like critically acclaimed books. Like,
very famous books.
Just because like we don't like something, by the way, even Anne of Green Gables. They're really famous books, and a lot of people like them. So like even the ones that we say we hate, you should just check them out. Maybe you might like it. But Z for Zachariah is basically this girl is living in middle America, like rural America, and nuclear war happens. The entire world is wiped out. But her family is living in this valley that's like a very small valley that's completely surrounded by these tall mountains. And so basically...
So the mountains protected them.
Yeah, so this mountain has its own ecosystem, and the weather doesn't come in. So it literally just...
It's like the Cascade Mountains.
It has everything, right? And so because of this, like there's no radiation, like everything's protected, right? And... right after the nuclear war, her family like abandons her. They leave her at her house saying that they're going to go to the nearby town and see if it's okay, but they never come back. So it's kind of like assumed that they die, right? So she's living by herself for like several years. And I think she's like 18 or 19. She's like young teens, like not a 20-year-old, but an adult. And basically, she's been living on her own and sustaining this thing for a couple of years now. And all of a sudden, one day, there's a guy that shows up in a radiation suit.
Yeah.
And the guy doesn't know the area, but he realizes that like this area is like different from where he's been, and takes off his suit and starts drinking water. But apparently, this water was coming from outside the valley, so it's still like radiated. So he gets radiation sickness, and she ends up like taking care of the guy for like 6 months. And a good chunk of the book is her learning about this guy, and he came across as like a really nice guy initially, but he keeps having these fever dreams, and you learn that he was like this important scientist, he was locked in a bunker during the nuclear war with another guy, and the other guy kept like wanting to see his wife. He's like, my wife is out there, I need to go get her, but they only have one radiation suit. Right? And the guy's like, no, you can't take the radiation suit. There's two of us. If you take that, you're going to leave me to die. You can't take it. And the guy keeps like saying, no, I promise I'll be back. I just need to go find my wife. And so they end up getting in this like altercation, and the guy pulls out a pistol, shoots and kills the guy, right? And so she learns about that, and the guy finally recovers out of radiation sickness, and like they try making a farm together and stuff, and he gets a little bit rapey.
Oh, really?
Right? Like he's like, well, we're the only ones, we need to be starting a family, and she's like, no, dude, you like murdered a guy. I'm not okay with this. And he keeps pushing the subject and like, no, but like we're the only, you're the only woman around here. And so like eventually they end up fighting, and she doesn't kill the guy, but she shoots him. And he ends up like leaving the valley. But as he's leaving, like he points and like tries to get her attention. Like, look, there's a flock of birds coming from outside. So it's like to imply that like things are starting to recover from outside the valley, and that's where the story ends.
Okay. Sounds like a great book.
I hated that book.
Yeah.
And the reason why I hated the book was because, first of all, when I was reading the story, I don't like the guy because of his decisions after he got better, but I was reading the book, and the book kept trying to paint this guy as a bad guy from how he responded to the situation where he shot the guy. And I'm just like, I don't know, man, that seems like a pretty reasonable take.
So like, you disagree with the author?
Yeah. So like, I didn't disagree with the guy when he was in that situation. I feel like most people would be in the situation like, no, you can't take the suit. There's two of us. There's one suit. I only have your word to go off of that you're going to come back. And if you leave, I'm going to run out of supplies and I'm going to die. So if you leave, you're basically saying I'm going to die. Right. So I think most people in that situation would definitely like understand where that guy's coming from. Now, when he gets like all the
afterwards,
all the bad stuff, like yeah. Like I'm not okay with that. But I just remember reading that book and being really frustrated and be like, why is she just automatically assuming this guy's bad?
Yeah.
Like if she were in that situation, she would probably make the same decisions he made, right?
Yeah.
So that I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get it. You disagree with the author.
Yeah.
I think so. One book that's really super famous that I just didn't like was A Tale of Two Cities. Did you ever read that?
Yeah.
It was the best.
Yeah, I don't even remember anything other than the intro of it.
Yeah, and it was just so the thing about what's the name of the author? Charles Dickens?
Charles Dickens.
Yeah, Charles Dickens, I'm pretty sure.
Might be, yeah.
But yeah. So the thing about Charles Dickens that people need to understand is he was paid by word. So he tried to make his stories as long as they could possibly go.
Well, tell that to J.R.R. Tolkien.
But
that man,
dude,
I don't think he was paid by the word, but he still
this wasn't on my reading list, but
yeah.
After, the Lord of the Rings movies, by the way, can you believe that the Lord of the Rings movies came out over 20 years ago?
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. But so after watching the movies, I wanted to read the books, and I got halfway through the Two Towers, and I was on like the 5th chapter of Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli running through the fields doing nothing. It was like something happens with Frodo and Samwise, and then it's like, oh, we're running through the fields. I think we're coming on the orcs. The end.
So we're kind of running low on time, but I really want to talk about Lord of the Rings because I think in order to really appreciate Lord of the Rings, you have to really have context of who J.R.R. Tolkien was.
Mm-hmm.
He was a man who served on the front lines for the British Army in World War One. He fought through World War One, fought in the bloodiest battle, the Somme of World War One, saw horrific atrocities. People who don't know about World War One,
you can look it up.
You should look it up because there was just disgusting things that were done to people. And he brought that home. He brought those experiences home, and I think a lot of the strength that he had as a person, he drew from his faith. And if you take it through that context and then you like read through Lord of the Rings, you really understand the story from a perspective of somebody dealing with PTSD and really relying on God.
Okay. Yeah, if you
and it really gives you a new perspective on Lord of the Rings, and it's like, oh wow, this is actually really interesting.
Yeah, because it's like him working through it, I guess.
Yeah.
I can see. I didn't think about that when I was in middle school.
No, of course not. Right? You see, fantasy cool Aragorn guy fighting a bunch of orcs.
30 pages of just running through fields.
Yeah. Or like the first 80 pages of the Fellowship of the Ring talking about Frodo's garden.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like it's hard to get through.
Yeah.
But if you learn about the context of who J.R.R. Tolkien was, and then you start reading The Lord of the Rings, I think you really appreciate it.
So there are a couple of books that I think would be good for a lot of people who watch our channel. They're learning English, and I was thinking about English books that would be interesting to read. One of them is Holes.
That's interesting that you recommend that. I love Holes. I think it's a great book, but why do you think that's a good one?
So first, that was a book I read when I was very young.
Yeah.
And so the level is actually quite low. So it's easier for English learners, I think.
Okay.
But what's interesting about that book is it was one of the first books I remember that had a couple of story arcs happening independently. Like one chapter was this, one chapter was the past, one chapter was Stanley, one chapter was the past. And they get tied together at the end.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes you think about how are these related as you're working through it. So I thought that would be good.
Yeah.
I also really liked it when I was young.
Yeah, it was a fun book. I have one, and I think this is probably going to come out as a shocker, but there's this book that I absolutely love, and I would really recommend people to read it because when Americans think of Japanese people, we don't really think about Japanese people in Japan. I think we more often think of like our experiences with Japanese Americans.
Yeah. Are you talking about Farewell to Manzanar?
And I'm going to recommend Farewell to Manzanar because first of all, it's a beautiful and well-written book.
It is a good book. What's it about?
So it's a true story. It's a memoir. So that's something that's very different.
So it's a book about memories of someone.
Yeah. It's kind of an autobiography.
A memoir is like an autobiography, but it's about a specific period of someone's life, not the whole thing.
Yeah. And basically it's about this Japanese American woman who's she is born and raised in Japan or in America. Her dad is from
I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure he's from Kyushu.
Okay.
But anyways, his family was like diehard samurai class that after samurai were abolished, they had nothing to do. And he grew up in that family and he was like, screw this. I am not going to become some random like businessman here in Japan. I'm going to go to America and I'm just going to get rich.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to like, so that's the attitude that he had. And he like moved over to Hawaii and like worked on a plantation for a while, then moved to Seattle and did some stuff and then moved to California and became a fisherman. Right. And so her family actually become really well off and like her dad had like, he owned a fishing business. They were partners with a canning factory and they had like a nice house in like Southern California. And then the war kicked off and America, and Japan entered the war together. And, basically what happened was America took all Japanese American citizens,
especially on the West Coast,
and like took everything from them and put them in camps.
Yeah.
Right.
Move them more like to the Midwest.
Yeah. So I think this family went to Arizona.
Yeah.
If I remember
the camp
right.
was called Manzanar, which is why it's called Farewell to Manzanar.
Yeah. And so anyway, so the story is her having everything taken from her, and like some of the things that I remember is like her mom has these like really, really expensive plates.
Yeah.
And they have to sell everything because the government's going to take it. So they can either sell it all right now or the government will just seize it, right?
Yeah.
And this mom's selling these like really expensive Chinaware at a yard sale. And this like white lady comes over and is like, I'll give you 50 cents for it.
Yeah.
And her mom was just like throwing the plates on the ground like, no, you're not buying these for 50 cents. I would rather see these plates broken than you rip me off and buy these really expensive plates for 50 cents.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's like some really emotional things like her dad, because he's actually a Japanese citizen, gets taken by the FBI and interrogated and like for several months.
Yeah.
And it breaks him. He ends up becoming like a horrible alcoholic and like ends up dying from, I think, liver failure because of that. And she kind of describes her life living in this camp.
Yeah.
And it's really the reason why I recommend it, because you might be like, Austin, why this is such a sad story. Why would you recommend? But it's not a sad story completely, right? There was a lot of things that she ended up becoming a stronger person because of her experiences. Yeah. But another thing is her family, and I think this was really unique with Japanese Americans, was they were obsessed with the idea of trying to become American and trying to like prove that they're American. Like there was this idea of like, we're not Japanese, we're Americans, right? And it's such an interesting mindset.
Yeah.
Right. That I think that like, especially like people here who are born in Japan to try and think of abandoning your culture to try and fit in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that was a little more common in the United States. Yeah. Like when my great grandfather got rid of his Greek names and took on English names,
Yeah.
But, I just want to say something too. Like you're talking about this now, because you read this book when you were in Seattle. I read this.
I read it recently too.
But in school, did you read it in school? Yeah. And I read it in school in Massachusetts on the other side of the country. Yeah. This is a book that is read all over the entire country.
Is it really?
Yeah, because I read in middle school. I read in middle school. And it's a book that has nationwide acclaim about an incredibly embarrassing and sad period of American history.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's like, normally you'd want to cover that stuff up, but this is like something that's being shown all over the country, even when we were really young.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that would not happen here.
Yeah. We had like a whole unit on it I think the West Coast kind of takes it there's a different tone with it because like you can still visit the internment camp areas on the West Coast. Like I don't know, have you ever been to like Puyallup?
No, I haven't.
That was a Japanese internment camp.
Yeah.
And a big reason why there's not a huge population of Japanese people in Seattle, despite Japan loving Seattle.
Yeah.
People love Seattle. They visit it all the time. And there used to be a huge Japanese population in Seattle, but after the war, they were all pushed to Canada and California.
Yeah.
Because, they were taken from Seattle.
Yeah.
Right. So you really understand the history between Japan and America when you read that. Yeah. When you read the book, and it's a wonderful book.
It is good. Yeah. So we have our recommended books for you guys. That got really heavy at the end, but yeah, man. I'm kind of curious. I would like to hear about, for you guys, what books did you read in school in Japan? I know you guys read Hyakuni Isshu, and I know you read some other things too, but I feel like people only read a part of that. What were some whole books that you guys read in school? Please let us know in the comments.
I know we're a little over time, but I just want to talk about there is one book that gets pushed a lot. And this came when I was a kid in high school.
Okay.
This was in my Japanese class, so it wasn't in like the normal English classes, but we were assigned the autobiography of Yukichi Fukuzawa.
Oh, really?
And
Yukichi Fukuzawa, yeah.
Or Fukuzawa Yukichi.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're in Japan. I should do last name first. But dude, that guy's life is so crazy.
I know.
It's so insane. It was a really good book. I wasn't expecting, because I was like, oh, dude, this old guy, like, why do I have to read a book about this guy?
And he steals away on a ship and goes to America.
Yeah, it's like this guy grows up in like a brothel.
Yeah.
And he's like talking about how it's like, I used to take baths where all the prostitutes would like wash off after like meeting guys. And it's like, I guess I'll go to America now, so I'm just going to sneak on this ship. Yeah. And it's like, the entire story is just like his experience just like going to these places. It was so fun.
Yeah. I mean, so I didn't read that because we didn't have Japanese class on the East Coast, but there's a lot of books we would recommend for you guys. So I want to hear the books that you guys read too. But I mean, I feel like we should do like a part 2 of this because there's so many books that we could talk about.
I love talking. Well, we'll see how popular this episode is. Some people will be like, freaking nerds.
I know if this doesn't get any views, no more talking about books.
Nope. It'll be media, social media, and like drama on TV shows from like Desperate Housewives or whatever is popular these days.
Gross.
I don't even think that's popular.
It's not anymore, man.
Anyways,
these shows are right. Anyways, I'll talk to you next time.
Yep.